I think it's on founders to really think deeply about their theory of the world and what they think will be true in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then build for that outcome. At the same time, they have to provide value today. So you got to find the sweet spot there, because otherwise you'll be sitting around for a while. Unless you have really, really deep pockets and you can raise like a lot of money, then maybe you have time to wait.
Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and today my guest is Lauren Vriens. She's an AI startup advisor and the VP of Growth Strategy at Accenture. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So for our audience, could you just go a little bit into your background and how you got into what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I like to say my claim to fame was I was the general manager at a startup called Revel, which did micromobility and electrification of cities. I was employee number 10, and we experienced insane rapid growth. So I shepherded in us growing from 500K to about 50 million in revenue in about a year and a half, and becoming a viral sensation in New York City, especially during COVID. And it was a really wild ride. I absolutely loved it. And then I took over as like head of strategy for the company and helping to solve the issues that emerged in the gaps between different teams. So things like loyalty, which impacts the revenue team, the product team, the operations team, and figuring out a path forward and pitching the founders on it, and then working with the teams to actually execute. And then after doing that, I got really interested in strategy as a function. And so joined Accenture, where I primarily work with Fortune 500 companies, helping them find the next lever of growth. So they have all the resources, they have all the smart people, they have all these things, and yet they really struggle sometimes to disrupt. And so how do we teach them how to think like entrepreneurs and launch products that people actually want? And so, yeah, that's how I got to where I am today.
It's fascinating because you've seen early stage startup, explosive growth and scale, and then working with Accenture, you get to see some of the challenges that the very largest enterprises have. But why don't we start off with maybe this sort of thread here, which is there a huge difference between AI native companies and companies that have been around for a long time, maybe startups that have been around for a long time, that are now moving into AI? Does being AI native give a huge advantage, or is that more of just maybe more marketing speed?
That's a great question. So Sam Altman has said that there will be a $1 billion one-person company using AI. It's a provocation. I'm not sure it'll exactly come true. You'll probably still need lawyers, but it's a good one. And so I do think the way of building companies is changing, though. So it used to be you would hire in generalists who can do anything and troubleshoot, and then eventually you bring in specialists and then you scale. Now I think the idea is, can you bring in like an AI optimizer as one of your first hires? And so that person is also a generalist, but they really understand how AI works and how you can apply it. So every time you solve a problem, now you're like, okay, let's automate it, rather than let's bring in 3 people to execute against it. And so if you're AI native, you are constantly looking for those opportunities to not add headcount, but actually add AI. And that keeps your overhead down. So it's quite smart.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in bootstrapping. I have seen it firsthand at Multimodal versus prior startups that I founded. And I think the efficiency gains from being AI native or having an AI native mindset, which is, can you introduce AI in different parts of your organization to introduce operational efficiency? It really does change the DNA of the company. You don't look to just hire people. You look at AI as maybe the first course of action. And if and only if you need it, you then bring on more bodies, right? So it's a really fascinating kind of frame for company building. So now moving maybe a little bit more to the challenges of the enterprise. They obviously have all the resources under the world, both capital and technical talent, but they often struggle with adopting AI, and they turn to Accentures of the world, right? Accenture being one of them. There are others as well. But in your perspective, what are the challenges that the enterprise are facing that they need to turn to external help to go and execute against their vision?
There are quite a few. I think part of the challenge is that a lot of enterprises are used to having really strict requirements on privacy, on data, on kind of what is an enterprise ready tech stack. And those tools didn't really exist 2 years ago. It's like from a Gen AI perspective, they are now being built today. And so what companies are doing is that they're trying to build something custom, but they're frankly going to be a lot slower than if they just went and got an off the shelf software to do something. And so I think it's that tension between building something we can control and we can own and we can make it really customized to our needs versus releasing a little bit of control and bringing in a product from like a relatively new startup, because a lot of these will have been relatively new. So yeah, but I think it's happening anyway. Like big enterprises are becoming more comfortable with AI. It depends on the sector though. As you probably know, finance is a little bit of a laggard there. They're getting there, but there's still like employees cannot use ChatGPT because of confidentiality and things like that. But I saw even at my time in one of my projects with Accenture, I was working with this is a story about I had 12 engineers and we were building a product. And then as they started using AI, which they just naturally started doing, the team composition had to change because it was like there were too many engineers and not enough people to actually build the backlog of like, what are we building? And so that's one of those things that when you're an existing company, you have to think about your resources, right? And like your composition of your teams might even change now that you become more AI forward, more AI driven.
Do you have examples of startups that have scaled very quickly by building with an AI native or AI first strategy? And I think your point is that there have been startups that have gone to at least $1 billion valuations and then have gotten acquired, right? In some cases, it might have been like acquihire plus acquisition of technology, but you've seen some insane scale and very large exits, even in the, let's say, 2 years since ChatGPT has been around.
Yeah. And it used to be the narrative that it was like, expect to spend 8 to 10 years building your startup, and then you can maybe hope for an exit. And that timeline seems to be accelerating with AI companies because bigger companies are like, we need this. They have something we need. Let's just acquire them.
I do wonder though, because AI is moving so quickly, how do you build a defensible business, right? So you could be really, you could have really insane growth very quickly because you've caught the right zeitgeist from either consumers or businesses. Maybe less so in regulated spaces because I think there things happen more methodically and it just takes time. But in some other verticals, particularly consumer, you can grow from 0 to 10 million plus in ARR very fast. I mean, we've seen it with some of the new AI companies that have come about. The major question, though, is given all that's happening with the foundation model players and other competitors are also building in a red hot space, how do you build a defensible moat? So I'm curious if you have some tricks of the trade that you would recommend to founders building in the space right now.
Defensible moat is very challenging, right? Because you almost have to think. You remember that meme that was like ChatGPT ate my startup? And it was like there's all these companies that launched essentially what became features of ChatGPT. And so that is definitely a risk. So there's two answers here. The smart founders I know who are building right now are thinking about how the world will change even if ChatGPT gets to AGI and like what, or OpenAI gets to AGI, like what will be the ecosystem around that is still necessary, even if ChatGPT becomes like, superhuman in intelligence. And so that's one, I think, really smart angle. The other one, and this is, the companies that have been acquired in recent times have done, is that they build massive communities. And that becomes really valuable in and of itself because you have loyalty and you have all of that momentum. And some of those there's a lot of like really interesting go-to-market strategies around community building that we can talk about as well.
The Economist just came out with a recent article where we're seeing the first casualties of AI, right? So when they called out a few companies, I mean, this is all public knowledge, but like Chegg is a good example where they served students. Now students are finding other outlets to go and get help, namely like ChatGPT, but there are others as well. So overnight, you saw what you thought was a sticky, maybe distribution base switch. I mean, their buying behavior switch, right? From buying from one provider to then maybe even buying for free in some cases with free versions of ChatGPT. So, how wary are you of startups seeing an implosion? Maybe startups have been around for some time, or even larger companies, right? It doesn't have to just be startups. But how much of a concern is there from AI just getting better? So like Sam Altman, OpenAI team getting better and others getting better, where they actually consume entire segments of the market because the core software is just by itself very good.
So there are other companies that have avoided that fate in, let's say, like the education space. Like Grammarly is one of them. And they've been around for, I don't remember exactly, but predating OpenAI. And they just, they added AI to their name and they pivoted hard into that space. And there's also other companies that have emerged, like Turnitin.com or whatever, that's like help students verify whether whether the plagiarism they actually did is real plagiarism. And so there's a lot of, I think, companies who are in a space that's being threatened need to launch new products really quickly and new features and really experiment in that space. And I think one company, in order to prevent themselves from being completely disrupted, one company that I think is doing an interesting job here is Typeform. They, forms, like, that was like the internet, right? It was like forms. Like everyone wants to collect information and they use it to customize things. And it's like, but now that might be replaced because you could get passive data collection maybe through AI, or you could even use a phone call from an AI bot that calls you. And so forms as a whole is being threatened. People don't want to use them anymore. And then they released Formless, which is like natural language form experience, which is actually really fun. You should try it. And so and it's complete beta, like it's buggy, it's whatever, but they just released it. And I think that's the tactic that I would recommend if you're afraid that ChatGPT or other AI companies will kind of completely disrupt you. Is like, how can you get in on it? How can you experiment with it?
Yeah, I think it's a tale of two cities, which is really incredible. Some are getting just absolutely crushed and they don't have a good defense, and others are taking advantage, right? Maybe gaining new market share and evolving. So, but it is a moment where you cannot just retain status quo. You have to adapt or get crushed in the process. So very fascinating to see. Earlier, we were talking about good and bad uses of layering on AI features. So I know you mentioned Notion and Instagram as two. I'm curious what your thoughts are on good examples of AI features being added on versus maybe not so good examples of that.
Yeah. So one of my favorites is Descript, which was actually founded by the former founder of Groupon, but totally different thing. It's video editing. And they have a feature called the Underlord, which has a personality, which I love because it, like, while you're waiting for it to do something, it'll make snarky quirks like, oh, you could have passive income already and things like that. So it's like got a personality, which is a nice touch, but it fulfills multiple functions. So you can ask, it's for education. You can ask it questions. So it's like a help chatbot. It's agentic, so it can even do things for you. So you're like, hey, add subtitles to this. And then it can also help you find things within the product. So it's like, hey, where do I find this thing? And it'll tell you how to find it. So it's a wholly integrated part of the platform and it can do many things and you don't have to go to different places to find it. And I thought that was a really smart deployment of AI and the user experience.
What about the ability for startups to price for these AI features? I mean, the worry was always companies that are introducing AI features, it'll be an expense because they will have to incur compute expense for running the models, introducing the AI capabilities, but their ability to pass through expenses to the end user might be more limited than we think, right? And obviously examples of this include Slack and Notion introducing AI features where you could choose to pay $10 a head extra for all the heads that make up your organization. But if it's not just a must-have, you may choose not to do it. And so then the question is like, do you offer it for free just to stay competitive, or do you not? So I'm curious, are people being able to charge more for their product because they've introduced AI features in a way where it's enhanced the experience enough where people are willing to go and spend maybe twice as much on the product than they would have had previously?
Yeah, Kyle Poyer talks about this a lot from Growth Unhinged in terms of our SaaS models changing, business models changing, because you have kind of two challenges here. It's like the cost of AI is uncertain in a way, like depends how much they use, depends how many queries, how much data they upload, et cetera. And so it's hard to predict what the unit economics is of a user when you layer in AI. And so what some companies are doing, which is interesting, is that they are doing usage pricing. So Clay has this where you can buy almost like credits, and then if you use some credits, you use them. If you don't, you don't. But they're basically offsetting your usage with the credits. And there's others that do something similar where you get a base amount of usage for your monthly subscription. And if you need more, you can buy more, which I think is also really interesting. So then you're kind of like offsetting those super users who might be costing you a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think it's a phenomenal way to do it because you're basically charging based on the value that you deliver. And if you're delivering a tremendous amounts of value to the power users, you're able to charge them more. And if people aren't willing to pay for it, right, because they're not getting value, that's also a phenomenal signal, right? Talk about like learning from product feedback that your users are providing. If they're not willing to pay for the AI features or not paying as much as you thought, maybe there's something wrong with the way that you've implemented AI into your core product. So it's a really phenomenal way. I think we've moved away from seat-based to more usage-based. And I think with agentic workflows, some of it's actually based on the unit of work that the AI portion is doing, right? So if it's running let's say in go-to-market, if it's running an email sequence for you, designing the copy, getting leads, validating the leads, enriching the leads, getting them out, maybe you start charging for every single positive response that agentic process starts. So it's really interesting to see sort of new pricing models emerge. Again, I think your ability to price for AI and really be able to command it, like pricing power is dependent on how much value you deliver at the end of the day. So it's really fascinating evolution of how things used to get priced and how AI companies are pricing going forward.
Yeah, the one thing I would say that I've seen companies do wrong is that they create an AI feature and then they want to charge you $10, $15, $20 to integrate it into your existing subscription. And the reason this doesn't work is because most users will not know how much AI will improve their experience with their product. Or honestly, AI and the way that you've deployed it was really to fix the limitations of your product to begin with. And so there's a lot of resistance to paying extra for something that should be built in. And the risk there is that a competitor comes along, builds the AI better than you, and also makes it part of the monthly subscription. And then people will leave for that. So I think gatekeeping AI behind an additional monthly subscription has not proven to work very well. And I think like Notion started with that as well. I know even Google Workspace has done it. I don't think it's working that well for them personally. I don't have inside knowledge on that, but that is just like nobody talks about it, even though it's actually a pretty cool product that they've built, but like nobody's really doing it because they don't want to pay for it when there is AI, we know, already built in so much of the Google suite. And so I think it's going to limit your uptake. But yeah, I do want to add, there's one good example of a company that started out completely free called Fathom, which is your like voice recording software or call recording software. And then they launched a new feature that they also released as free, which is that it would pull out the to-do list from your call, and then you can email it to the people that were in the call, which is like super useful. And the first couple of times I used it, I was like, this is amazing. And then they put a price on it. And I was actually like, I think I will pay for this, because now the value was clear to me because I had gotten used to it. I had used it. They gave it away for free for a long time. And then they're like, okay, now that you know the value, we'll put a price on it. And I thought that was a really smart deployment.
I completely agree. And I think, we're users of Gong here at Multimodal, but the reason why we love Gong is it's connected to our CRM Salesforce. It allows us to track both email and call activity, and you're able to get incredible transcripts from all the calls that we record, and you have perfect lineage. So if you have, we do very high ACV sales into enterprise, so it takes dozen or more touch points over a very long time to get them from initial conversations into a POC and pilot and eventually into production. And so you do want to understand like what touch points have you had over what course of time, over which individuals within the larger org. And so Gong has a beautiful implementation of AI, but it's also working on the data layer that they've assembled, right? And so we're really deeply entrenched. Like for us to go and switch off of Gong to a Fathom is very hard because they've kept us in with AI plus everything else, right? That makes it sticky. So it's very interesting to see sort of how you can build incumbency and retain incumbency if you do this well. Now, if Gong didn't have really great AI features and we had to leave Gong to get Fathom as well to complement it, now all of a sudden like Gong's missing out and then Gong gets disrupted if they don't make that pivot, right? So very, very interesting to see sort of how companies are remaining competitive and gaining or losing market share depending on their AI implementation.
Yeah. Have you heard of the AI tourist problem?
I have not.
When you're talking about retention, it made me think of it. So it's the idea that people will come and they'll play with your product or whatever, and then they have like no investment in it. And so they leave or they forget or there's some other shiny object. And so what you're talking about with Gong having this data layer that the product essentially gets better and better the more you use it is a fascinating way to retain users and not have them just kind of be tourists that come and try your product and then leave and never come back. But retention is the next big problem for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I don't think we talk enough about that in the world of AI. So I think we were speaking about how you could get to 10 million ARR really quickly these days. I mean, especially if you certain verticals and certain product experiences and such. The hard part though is retention. So if your quality of revenue isn't that high, you might have a leaky bucket problem, and you might realize that a little bit too late. And so you start experiencing churn, and churn adds to the headwind, right? And it makes it a little bit harder. Your LTV for your customers might be actually more limited than you think. So I think that is going to be really, really important when you think about operating companies, getting investment dollars for investors. That's going to be an important thing to consider. It's not just the amount of revenue, but the quality of that revenue over time as well.
Yeah. And I think that's that used to be kind of like on the finance side or the marketing side or like whatever. I honestly think it's really a product concern. Actually, it should be everyone's concern, but you really need to think about how is your product being built in a way where it gets better over time. And a lot of that does get down to the data side, right? So if someone has invested a lot of time and energy into like customizing their experience with your product and their data informs their experience, then that gives them some loyalty, that gives some incentive to stick around, because we're all kind of like overwhelmed with options now and new products are emerging all the time. So the idea is how can you continue to how does that value accrue over time and get bigger and bigger?
What about companies like Perplexity, right? Perplexity is a very interesting example because they didn't start with their own foundation models, and I'm not sure if they're developing their own. I still think that they're not. I think they're using other players like Anthropic and OpenAI and such. Maybe they have their own Meta's Llama 3 implementation, but at the end of the day, they're largely using foundation models from other providers. But they've developed a really great product experience, and like you were saying earlier, it's free to try. Right, you could do the pro searches. I think it's like 5 pro searches a day on a free version, but they let you see the product experience from the very get-go. You're not actually having to open an account. You're not signing in. It's like available immediately, like any search engine. And then, if you have a beautiful product experience, you're using pro consistently, and you get capped based on the number of requests that you could make on the free version. You then are more inclined to become a premium subscriber, right? A pro subscriber. I'm curious from your perspective, I just described maybe like what I see, but from your perspective, how is Perplexity able to compete among many other similar offerings? You could argue that Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude all have similar capabilities in some ways.
Perplexity is really smart, actually. I've been watching them for a while now because I don't know if this is what they're actually doing, but my impression is that they're doing what OpenAI has stated they cannot or will not because of politics in a way. And so, for example, when the election was going on, they launched like a real-time election tracker that, obviously OpenAI could have done as well, or anyone else could have done as well, but they weren't willing to like step into that fray. And for example, they just launched a commerce layer. So now you can buy things through Perplexity. And on OpenAI's like mission or website, it's like, we will never use your data to sell you things. So they're basically building on top of ChatGPT and doing the things that OpenAI is not willing to do because they're frankly in the hot seat, right? Like all eyes are on them. There's a lot of speculation and criticism, et cetera. And so they're just moving super fast and doing things that like even they reached out to when New York Times employees were striking, they reached out the CEO reached out and was like, oh, we could help you. So basically volunteering to be scabs. It's like OpenAI would have never done that because they've been sued by New York Times and also Perplexity was sued by New York Times, but they don't care. They're just like moving super fast and experimenting with stuff. And I have to respect that because it's really carved out a moat for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting to is like you have to find very efficient ways to go and have scale motions, right? Getting your product out there, getting people to try it, showing value and delivering value before you charge them. I mean, these are fundamental parts of the startup playbook that I think you're speaking to. Now, obviously, you're an AI startup advisor. Maybe let's take this from the very beginning, right? So if I were an entrepreneur trying to build a company here, and let's say it's a native AI play, what are some of the things I should consider as I build this company? I mean, you named one, which is getting an AI optimizer as one of the first key hires to go and optimize process. So you're not having to hire as many bodies as you might have previously. But what are other tricks of the trade that you would recommend for starting out companies here?
The hardest part for founders today is the traditional way was like, okay, what's the problem set of this group of people? And then how do I solve for that problem? But now you almost need to anticipate what are their problems going to be in 6 months and 12 months, right? Because it's like the pace of change is moving so quickly, but by the time you launch a product, it's like your problem set might be different. And so there's also companies, and this goes back to Perplexity too, that's doing a really good job as they build, they're constantly seeking feedback. And so I've seen a lot of startups now integrate a website called canny.io into their site. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but essentially it allows you to publish your roadmap publicly, have people vote on features, have people provide feedback publicly, and other people can like vote up those comments and things like that. And so they're putting something out there, they're getting feedback, but then they're constantly iterating. And so it's like, even if you think so don't just build and then like hope people will come, and that was always the advice, but now it's even more important to have like a really, really fast feedback loop so that you can pivot really quickly as things emerge in the market, as you see opportunities that come out, and as your users start to get more familiar with what AI can do and they start asking for things. And so I think that's more of like a mindset, is like, how do you move quickly and break some things?
But I do wonder if users are always right. And the reason why I say that is because when you looked at AI 2 years ago, people thought co-pilots or chatbots or the name of the game. Obviously, the temperature in the room has shifted now maybe to like agentic AI. And I'm sure there will be other things that come along, but agentic AI being more action oriented, right? So actually doing units of work along the way versus just giving you kind of a question and answer experience. Not that the question and answer experience isn't also necessary, as you can see with Perplexity, but I'm curious how much of it is taking an opinionated stance, maybe putting your neck out on the line a little bit ahead of maybe where the market appetite is, versus just like doing what people are asking for today. As you mentioned, since the underlying technology continues to get better, how much ahead of the market do you need to build to go and make sure your product is truly differentiated among the rest of the market there?
Yeah, it's you're right. You're 100% right. So a lot of like AI is not mass market yet. I mean, it's getting there, but it's not at the, like Google level, right? And so asking users you shouldn't ask users what the vision of your company should be, but you can ask them what features they wish they had to use your product better. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's on founders to really think deeply about their theory of the world and what they think will be true in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then build for that outcome. At the same time, they have to provide value today. So you got to find the sweet spot there, because otherwise you'll be sitting around for a while. Unless you have really, really deep pockets and you can raise like a lot of money, then maybe you have time to wait.
I love that. I mean, I think that's a great way you put it, which is be opinionated on the vision, right? What is that North Star that you're marking towards? But at the same time, you also have to sell in the market in the way that the market is set up today. And so being aware of what features matter that really could go and make a difference between a sale now versus not making a sale, right? I mean, the viability of a company is very dependent, especially in this macro environment, on having capital, having a revenue generation, right? There's a huge emphasis on that. Whereas a couple of years ago, maybe not so much. As startups think about making their tech stack choices, right? We've named many players in different segments. How would you advise a startup to go and pick and choose what do they include as part of their core tech stack, given how much and how fluid the entire seems to be today?
Yeah, this is not an easy question to answer, but I think first and foremost, you have to look at your tech stack from the perspective of, can this handle AI workflows? Can it handle the type of latency you expect? Can it handle vast amounts of data, like more than you would expect or even know that you might want to store in the future? And so analyzing the tech stack from that lens, like, is this the right database for you? And then I think building in a modular way, because it's almost inevitable. I don't believe there is maintenance mode for products anymore. It's like you are going to be building in new parts of your stack, changing features, et cetera, almost constantly because the market is moving so fast. And so don't get stuck in stone. Build in a way that's modular and where you can extract pieces of your tech stack and replace them if you need to.
And I think that's a great read in the market right now. Just you have to be fluid, right? But you have to kind of basically pick a line in the sand and stick with it as well. When it comes to hiring talent, right? I think talent is a really important question. And I think it's important for startups that are building in AI, but then also enterprises that want to attract top AI talent, just given that a lot of times they're trying to experiment, do work in-house, right? And I don't know if that will be a permanent thing or they start turning more to vendors. And of course, consulting firms have been huge beneficiaries of this. But as a company, startup or enterprise, how do you compete for this scarce top AI talent, given that some of the talent is just being consumed entirely by some of the largest, like Magnificent Seven and the open AIs of the world?
Yeah, so recruiting top AI talent is a challenge and will always be a challenge. I'm not sure there's really an answer to it besides the age-old answer, which is like, you, as a founder, you have to be able to sell your company. And by sell, I mean you have to sell employees on why it's the coolest thing since sliced bread and they should join you on this mission. And that's for investors, for customers, for whoever. It's really that storytelling narrative. Like, how are you going to make their portfolio better? How are you going to scratch their itch to be curious and to be on the cutting edge of things? And that's really the bare minimum of what you would need to do in order to recruit that type of talent. But I would also ask whether, and this might be heresy, but do you need that top AI engineer that's like 1 in a million? Or can you just hire people who understand fundamentally the current limitations of AI? They've played around with it, they've built their own things, and they understand what they don't know. And then they're adaptable and they're curious and they want to learn on the fly. I think that's also an interesting strategy to pursue. So AI engineers who are deeply curious and are reading the reports, reading the studies, scoping out what other companies are doing and are willing to learn and experiment, because they also now use AI, right? So like they don't have to necessarily have built that thing before. Frankly, very few people have built that thing before because everything's new. So can you just find someone who's really curious and wants to learn?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having some senior talent that really knows and can set the tone and mentor and coach. But everyone has a similar starting point, right? So sometimes you hire the people that are really hungry, willing to learn. And if they can pick up new things along the way, those could be some incredible hires, right? And you're resource strapped as a startup at least, right? So thinking through how to use that valuable capital that you have and make it work for you versus having to go and compete with like a Meta on an AI engineer. It's just hard, right? I think you have to make some tough choices there. And I think part of that, I think we talked about product, the tech stack, hiring. I think a lot of that is also very effective scale up motions. Obviously, you did that with Revel, or you're part of that early story going from 500K to 50 million. I'm curious, what are some tricks of the trade when it comes to very efficiently scaling up ventures after you've found product market fit?
Do you mean from a hiring perspective?
No, I mean from
processes?
finding customers, really getting like an efficient go-to-market motion in place.
Okay, yeah. So I'm glad we're talking about this because I've been studying this of a couple of different startups and how they've managed to do it. And a lot of them, it's kind of like a mix of like UGC, but also community-driven growth. So for example, there's one called Crew AI, which you're probably familiar with them. They also do agentic workflows, and they're creating, like, it's not live yet, but they're creating a marketplace, right? So that people could submit their own workflows. And so you get a bunch of developers that are like, oh, I built something and now I want to promote it as well. And so that's like a built-in growth engine in a way. The Clay did that as well. So they had, essentially there was all these AI agencies popping up, And people were finding Clay kind of difficult to use and set up to do prospecting and research and whatever. So AI agencies started saying, oh, I'm Clay certified. I'll help you launch Clay. And so now you had these third parties that were like creating UGC for this company and driving a lot of action on LinkedIn. And there's a couple of other really great examples where they're thinking through growth as like a core. It's not paid ads, right? It's not even SEO. Like maybe it's SEO, but that's a long tail activity. They're really thinking about how do we get groups of people hyper excited about this so that they are willing to invest the time and energy into it. And yeah, Reddit's a great community for that. Discord's a great community for that. How do you find those people that are going to become the advocates for you, even if they're not your target customer?
I mean, I love that because I think the old model used to be you just pay for ads and maybe you pay influencers, right? And some of that, and I think still matters to some extent, but I think if you get more community-based growth, right, that is an incredibly capital efficient motion. And frankly, I think it speaks volumes because it's not based on dollars and it's not transactional. It's like people that really are creating content and speaking about a product and trying to drive more value on the product, and they're getting something out of it as well. But it's much more of that flywheel effect, right? Without like requiring huge sums of money just pumped in every single year to keep it going. So, and I think given where the macro market is around startups and venture, around being more capital efficient, I think it's a phenomenal way to go and engineer growth. I mean, the other thing that we're seeing is like even in B2B, they're borrowing from the consumer playbook. And you're seeing more founder-led brands, founder content as an example, right? And that's happening on channels like LinkedIn and X and others. But again, another way to go and resonate with the buyers that are also hanging out on LinkedIn and then breaking through the noise. And I think that is going to be really pivotal for long-term capital efficient go-to-market motions.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think the key trend here is that there's almost a consumer lack of trust. And it's going to get worse because there's going to be so much AI generated stuff. And so that's why founder-led marketing is resonating so hard, is because it's like you're meeting the person who created this company. They have a personality, they have hot takes, they have opinions. And now you actually have like an identity with this company. You have a reason that you might trust them. And so every startup that I talk to, every founder that I talk to, I'm like, even if you hate it, like you have to start with founder-led marketing. You have to start posting on LinkedIn and sharing your perspective, because otherwise people have like, you can build a beautiful website and a beautiful product and people want to know who is behind this. They don't trust it until they know that. And so you have to be much more transparent than you ever had to be before.
Yep, I completely agree. And trust is happening through video, especially, right? So that's kind of been the breakthrough channel. Last question here. I mean, obviously, you're very well informed about everything that's happening in AI. You advise startups. How do you stay informed about everything net new that's coming about in AI to effectively navigate through all the different inflection points that we're seeing?
Yeah, it is challenging to stay up to speed on everything. Luckily, this is my hobby. I don't just do it for work. I also love it. But, I think like, honestly, Twitter X is like a really good source of stuff. If you follow the people who are actually building things, maybe they're like the senior product manager at OpenAI or whatever, or at Claude. Like there's people that are literally publishing, hey, we're experimenting with this, or what's your feedback on our artifacts feature? And then you get to see everyone's comments and things like that. And so you really get to understand what's being built right now and today. And so that's a great way to stay informed. And then I also do like try to read some of the studies that come out. Anthropic is really good at publishing research that they've done. And so that's always interesting. And then I think and then you also just find certain people that are like really, really well informed. And then you just want to pick their brain and understand what they're thinking. But yeah, I think the thing that was most pivotal for me for feeling confident that I can even ingest what's coming out was playing around and building my own AI products so that I deeply understood the limitations that exist, because everything that's being built now is to address those limitations. So once you have a handle of those, and there's not that many, I guess, like I think there's like 5 or 6 or so, then you understand what people are working on and why they're doing what they're doing. And so that's a good base, I think, for people just starting out is go try and understand like what those limitations are. Like I mentioned the needle in the haystack challenge, or, context windows and what problem that creates, and other things like that.
Amazing. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, Lauren. For our audience, if they want to find more about you, what you're doing, if they're looking for an advisor for their venture, where could they find more information about you?
They should follow me on LinkedIn because I post videos about AI all the time, so they can watch those. It's under Lauren Vriens.
Amazing. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.